Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I am bringing you a recommendations video. Now this is going to be a recommendations video for the next round of Royal Readathon, which is Sizzling Summer. So I'm going to be honest right now, because the prompts are kind of based on romance. All of my recs are romance. Some of them are like fantasy romance where romance isn't necessarily the main plot point, but some of them is just straight up romance. There are some of these prompts where you can stretch them to not be romance. However, because they were based around romance, I cannot think of any non-romance recs for these, so I apologize for that. But check out the comments, because someone might comment with some recommendations that aren't romance. But I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Usually in my recommendations videos, what I do, I give you one of the prompts and give you a list of books that will fit that prompt and then move on to the next prompt. However, so many of these overlap that I'm just going to hold up the book, tell you what prompts I recommend it for, and then move on to the next book, because there is a lot of books here and a lot of them count for more than one prompt. So let's just get stuck in. So first up, I'm going with a pretty obvious one for me, and it's the Last Hours trilogy by Cassandra Clare. Now I'm holding up Chain of Gold. August's book for By the Angel Along is actually the second book, which is Chain of Iron. However, all three books in this series will fit that Sleeping Beauty prompt for arranged marriage. Obviously with the time that it's set in, arranged marriages happen, and there are a few mentioned in this. Again, like we mentioned in the actual announcement video, the arranged marriage does not actually have to follow through. It can be a marriage that's arranged and then it just falls apart for whatever reason and it doesn't actually happen, or it can actually happen. Any mention of arranged marriage will count for this prompt. This will also count hugely for miscommunication. To be honest, most romance will fit the miscommunication trope. This one definitely does. But I love it, which, you know, miscommunication is not my favourite trope, but I think it works in this one, even if it does frustrate me. This series also works for forced proximity, and to an extent, friends to lovers, I think it works for as well. So, yes. Next up is another obvious one for me to recommend, and it's the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. August is the first month of Mass Along, which is being hosted by Ash over at Ashley's Bookish Life and Tori at A Scottish Lass Reads, or A Lass Reads as she's on some. Anyway, they are doing a read along of all the Sarah J Maas books, and they are starting in August with Throne of Glass. So this works for enemies to lovers. It also works for unconventional love interest, miscommunication, and forced proximity. So again, it fits for quite a few. Later on books in the series fit some other prompts, but I can't talk about that because it's very late in the series. But if you're far further along in the series, they're prompts that you'll sort of be able to tell will fit. Next up, we have Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerry Maniscalco. This one, the main one, is enemies to lovers. This fits enemies to lovers. It also fits arranged marriage and unconventional love interest, and I think one bed trope as well. I'm sure it has the one bed trope. Maybe not in this book. Does it have it in this book? Might be in one of the other of this trilogy. Possibly. I can't remember if it has that trope. And also forced proximity as well. And I'd say dark romance. Next, we're going to go for the entire Wicked Villain series by Katie Robert, because this will work for unconventional love interest. It will work for dark romance, forced proximity, and most of them work for enemies to lovers, if not all of them. So I highly recommend this entire series, like, as I keep telling everyone to read it, because, well, not everyone. You have to be ready for the amount of smut that's in these. It's like every other chapter. But if that's your thing, read this. Next up, we have Frostblood by Ellie Blake. This is an underrated one. Not enough people talk about this. But this works for enemies to lovers, unconventional love interest, Does it work for another one? I'm going to say forced proximity. It works for as well. And a bit of miscommunication. Next we have Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber. Both books in this, I think it's a trilogy or a duology. Both books that are currently out will work for what prompts I'm going to give you. We have an unconventional love interest. We have arranged marriage because there's royalty. There is an arranged marriage in this. We have a bit of enemies to lovers. And I just love it. Next is another pretty popular series, and that's the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. The main one that this works for is enemies to lovers. However, I do think unconventional love interest, dark romance definitely work for this. I am also almost certain almost every book in this series has the one bed trope, so I think it counts for that as well. And I can't remember if I said, but forced proximity works as well. Next up, we have Lake's Edge by Lyndall Clipstone. This one, the main one, is unconventional love interest, enemies to lovers, false proximity, to an extent, dark romance. And I think that's it for that one. I'm going to move on to a bit of contemporary romance. There is more like fantasy romance in this pile. I have a huge pile of books next to me. Like you can probably see my romance shelf. Or my red romance shelf is very empty. Next up, we have The Upside of Falling by Alex Light. This is a YA contemporary. So it's a lighter contemporary, but this has the fake dating trope and I would say friends to lovers, happily ever after. I'm just going to say right now that any contemporary romance, you can assume it's going to have a happily ever after. You can't do that with fantasy romance, but contemporary romance, yes. I mean, if you want to stretch it, you can say forced proximity because they are classmates. And I'm okay with you stretching it. Next is You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. The main one for this is miscommunication. There's also forced proximity. You could stretch this to be enemies to lovers. One thing I will say, though, going into this, just know that, I mean, this isn't a spoiler. It's on the blurb. They are already engaged. And then they decide that they despise each other. But neither of them want to be the one to back out of the wedding and have to pay out for all the deposits and stuff. So yeah, I'm going to say enemies to lovers because they get to the point where they despise each other. But this is incredible. This is like my best example of miscommunication done right. It's so good. We're getting through these. Next up, you have You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. The main one is friends to lovers. I'm going to say false proximity because they are on holiday together. Again, happily ever after. It's a contemporary romance. I think, does it have one bed trope? If I recall, this has the one bed trope, but I'm not 100% on that. Next, we have Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. The main one for this is enemies to lovers, false proximity. You could say dark romance because some dark stuff happens in it because it's a fantasy. There's a hell of a lot of miscommunication in this. You could stretch it to be one bed because they share a room. They're in a dorm room in school. So you can stretch it to one bed if you want because it's one bedroom. Next, we have Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. Main one for this is enemies to lovers. Arranged marriage kind of for this. Unconventional love interest. Dark romance. Forced proximity. I think they all work for this one. Next, we have The 5-Year Plan by Carla Burgess. Main one for this is Happily Ever After. I'm going to be honest, it has been a while since I read this. So I think it has the one bed trope. I feel like it definitely has miscommunication, but it has been a while since I read this, but I just remember absolutely loving it and I do want to reread this soon. But I won't have a chance to reread this before this video needs to go live, so I can't confirm. But it definitely works for Happily Ever After. Next, we have Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton. Main one for this is unconventional love interest. Basically, any book that has like a human and a fairy, or a human and a werewolf, or human and a vampire is going to work. And this is fairies and nightmare. So unconventional love interest, one bed trope, miscommunication, dark romance, forced proximity, arranged marriage, enemies to lovers, and to an extent, friends to lovers as well. I do think it can count for both, which makes no sense unless you read it. Next, we have The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. So this one will work to an extent for enemies to lovers. It will also work for unconventional love interest because he is like essentially the boss of the place that she works. So yeah, they're the only two I can think of. Miscommunication as well, actually. Are we shocked that a romance has miscommunication? No. Next, we have The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. The main one for this is, of course, enemies to lovers and friends to lovers. This one is one that works for both, and I love it. And there's also miscommunication in this one. Next, we have Malice by Heather Walter. This one, the main ones are enemies to lovers, dark romance, and unconventional love interest. Next, we have Crave by Tracy Wolfe. The main one for this is unconventional love interest. They're all different species. Miscommunication is a big one for this. I mean, I wouldn't say this is a dark romance because it's YA. However, some bits get a bit dark and it is a vampire like romance. So you could say dark romance for that. I'll allow. Next, I have all 3 F.T. Lukens books I've read and loved. They all fit for different prompts. Spellbound works for enemies to lovers and friends to lovers. In Deeper Waters works for unconventional love interest and friends to lovers. And So This Is Ever After works for friends to lovers and miscommunication. And you could throw in arranged marriage for this as well. We're getting through this pile. Next up is both of these books for different prompts. So we have It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This one is enemies to lovers, miscommunication, and forced proximity. And then the sequel, Hook, Line and Sinker, works for friends to lovers. There's a little bit of miscommunication sprinkled in on this. And they both work for happily ever after. Next, we have One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This works for unconventional love interest and also friends to lovers. There's a little bit of miscommunication. You can kind of stretch it. This one isn't too bad on miscommunication. So if you're getting sick of miscommunication, I do think this is a pretty good one. Next, we have The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. This one fits miscommunication. The main one is forced proximity. And I'm going to say friends to lovers, but also happily ever after. Next, we have this series by Olivia Dade. So first up, we have, spoiler alert, the only ones it really fits for this one is miscommunication and happily ever after. All the Feels works for miscommunication, forced proximity, friends to lovers, happily ever after. And I think that's it. And then Shipwrecked works for forced proximity, miscommunication, and friends to lovers maybe. I'm gonna say yes to friends to lovers, but that's not really like the big one for this. And happily ever after. Next, we have A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Cover. This one, unconventional love interest, enemies to lovers, forced proximity, arranged marriage. Does it fit any of the others? Dark romance, because elves. This is amazing. Read it. XOXO by Axio. The only one really I think this one works for other than happily ever after is the unconventional love interest, because it's based around a K-pop star who can't really be dating but does anyway. But this is really cute and it's a YA contemporary. See, I'm not just giving you all the adult, I'm giving you some YA too. Right, we've got 2 more authors to do. One of them you're going to know because you're going to be like, hang on a sec, Becca hasn't mentioned this author yet. Trust me, I'm leaving the best till last. But next up we have Elena Armas. So The Spanish Love Deception works for the one bed trope, miscommunication, forced proximity, fake dating, enemies to lovers, and happily ever after. American Roommate Experiment works for one bed trope. I'm going to say unconventional love interest for this one. Miscommunication, forced proximity, Fake Dating, and Friends to Lovers and Happily Ever After. And then the final books I'm going to recommend, I don't think this needs any introduction. It's Ali Hazelwood. Are we shocked? No. So first up, we have The Love Hypothesis. So I'm going to say you can stretch it to one bed trope because she thinks there's going to be the one bed trope and it's mentioned. So I'm going to give you that one. So this fits the one bed trope. Unconventional love interest, because he is a teacher at the school she goes to, or the university, not school, university she goes to, not her teacher. I always like to just reiterate that. Miscommunication, fake dating, Friends to Lovers, and Happily Ever After. Love on the Brain, we have miscommunication, forced proximity, and then I'm going to say enemies to lovers and friends to lovers for this one, and then Happily Ever After. Loathe to love you. You can read all three separately. All three of them are enemies to lovers and have a happy ending and have miscommunication. All three also have forced proximity, and I think they're just all amazing. And the final book is Love Theoretically. It's the new one. I love it so much. I'm sorry, I'm not. I haven't talked about this one enough yet. So this one has unconventional love interest, miscommunication, forced proximity, fake dating, but not in the way you would think. I'll come back to that. Enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, happily ever after. So the reason I say this doesn't have fake dating in the way that you think it will is because if you're someone that doesn't like the fake dating trope, this is perfect because the fake dating isn't between these two. She is basically a girlfriend for hire. She fake dates people. And that is how the story starts. However, he is not one of the people that she fake dates. It does come up in conversation at points, and there are some really funny moments. Honestly, it's so good. And if you're not a fan of the fake dating trope, I think this is perfect if you want to fill this prompt, because the fake dating itself has nothing to do with the romance plotline. It is just an added little extra, and I am here for it. I love it so much. Okay, so there are probably so many more that I could have recommended to you. These are the ones that really stood out to me when I was looking at the prompts, and I was like, oh, that book, that book, that book, that book. And I currently have my bed full of books now that I have to put back on my shelf. So wish me luck on that. But if you have any recommendations that I have not mentioned, please put them in the comments below so that me and others can have a look and get some more ideas. I have some more ideas, but they're not really recommendations because I haven't read them yet, so they may or may not end up on my own TBR. But I hope you are taking part in Readathon, and if you do, you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this video and got some good recommendations. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!